My mother-in-law constantly demanded money and used my wife for support. My wife defended her, even when she stole from us. My relationship with my wife, Carol, and her mother Eleanor, has been worsening for years. It's a sluggish, grinding problem, the kind that eats away at you gradually. It's reached a breaking point, and I'm not sure what the next move should be. It all comes down to Eleanor's almost infinite feeling of entitlement and Carol's complete inability to confront it, or even accept it, really. To understand the dynamic, some background is required. Carol and I met at a business event around 6 years ago, through a mutual friend. I enjoyed how she was instantly candid and honest about her family's financial history. She mentioned that her family was previously immensely affluent. They had a large house in an elite neighborhood, several costly automobiles, and a lifestyle that frankly, I couldn't understand. But, according to Carol, a succession of catastrophic investments, along with constantly terrible financial decisions, caused them to lose practically everything. She referred to her parents, Eleanor and Richard, as having lavish tastes. They'd buy things they couldn't afford, boats, sports cars, and take out loans they couldn't possibly repay. This debt cycle persisted, she claimed, until they were forced to sell their mansion and relocate to a much smaller condo. Despite this, Carol insisted that her parents had done their best. She insisted they had given her all she could possibly want. However, the story she told me over time showed a very different reality, one that made it difficult for me to connect with her parents. My wife's 17th birthday incident was especially telling. Carol had received a large sum of money as gifts from several family members. Carol claims Eleanor pressured her into turning her the money. She used guilt, claiming that she needed the money more than Carol did, and that Carol did not comprehend the demands of running a household. Carol then learned that Eleanor had used the money to have a professional perm. When Carol, naturally outraged, approached her mother, Eleanor's response was chillingly nasty. She informed Carol that she had always supplied food, shelter, and clothing for her and thus was entitled to the money. Carol's father, Richard, was, in many ways, worse. He had a child outside of his marriage to Eleanor and was legally required to pay child support. However, when Carol started her first job, Richard began asking that she contribute to these payments. He'd constantly pressure her, stating he couldn't afford it and that she needed to support the family. He would also frequently urge Carol to buy him stuff for their condo, a new, larger television, a cutting-edge refrigerator, even if the ones they already had were perfectly adequate. If Carol ever rejected or hesitated, Richard appeared to become hostile. He'd threaten to shatter her phone and laptop, the few things she owned that were genuinely hers. Carol recounted to me these anecdotes with detached grief, as if she had long ago accepted this conduct as usual. Only after she moved out of her parents' condo and into her own little apartment did she feel truly independent, with authority over her own life. My upbringing was the total opposite. My parents, John and Mary, were the salt of the earth. We were not impoverished, but neither were we wealthy. We lived in a modest working-class neighborhood. Dad worked as a mechanic at a neighborhood garage for more than 30 years. Mom worked in a bakery down the street, baking donuts and pastries. They worked so hard to provide for me. They scrimped and saved to ensure that I had all I required for school. They never complained. Never made me feel like a burden. Years later, once I finished college and found a respectable career, I was able to save a large sum of money. My biggest dream, which I had for years, was to buy a house for my parents. A tiny, comfortable home in a quiet area. It was a long-time fantasy that they had never imagined could come true. When I eventually did it, and handed them the keys, my father attempted to refuse. He stated that was too costly and I shouldn't spend my money on them. It took a lot of convincing and earnest pleading before he ultimately agreed. Both were in tears. It was one of the happiest days of my life. After that, they never requested anything from me, despite the fact that I offered to aid them financially on a regular basis. They both took on part-time jobs to keep themselves busy and earn some extra money. They emphasized, with quiet dignity, that parents should care for their children, not the other way around. So you can imagine the culture shock I felt when I first met Carol's folks. It felt like I had entered an entirely new universe. The first experience with Eleanor was unsettling. We were in a restaurant. Carol had planned a meal for us to meet. Eleanor looked me up and down, and her first inquiry was, "So, are you wealthy?" "No, hello. It's good to meet you," just a direct, blunt question regarding my financial situation. I stuttered about having steady work and making a decent living. Following our initial meeting, Eleanor made it her mission to understand everything she could about my money. She'd ask probing questions that always led back to money. She asked about my insurance plans, financial portfolio, and retirement savings. It was really intrusive, and it made me very uncomfortable. I voiced my worries to Carol, who, to her credit, spoke with her mother. She asked Eleanor to stop. But Eleanor merely changed her approach. She began asking similar questions when Carol was not around, cornering me at family gatherings or calling me personally. One particularly noteworthy occasion came when I casually announced that I had paid off all of my student loans. Eleanor's eyes brightened up. She instantly started into a diatribe about how I should help Carol pay off her bills. Because I was in such a great situation, I had a responsibility to help her. We were just dating at the time. It was an extremely inappropriate suggestion, and it made me feel like I was being treated like a walking ATM. I finally, firmly, told Eleanor that I was uncomfortable discussing my personal money with her and that I would prefer it if she respected my limits. Carol received continuous demands for money. Eleanor would phone Carol several times a week, often more than once a day, to ask for money. The quantities varied, but they were all significant. $1,000 here, $500 there. The pattern was consistently the same. Eleanor would call, often in tears, claiming to have an urgent need, a medical bill, a car repair, a sudden unanticipated expense. Carol, ever the obedient daughter, would express worry while explaining that she was attempting to conserve money. That she couldn't simply keep handing over enormous amounts of money. Eleanor would then embark on a guilt trip. Carol was reminded of all the sacrifices she has made for her. I promised to pay her back. Of course, the payments never arrived. If Carol ventured to bring up the remaining obligations, Eleanor would be furious. She would yell at Carol. Accuse her of being ungrateful, selfish. She didn't appreciate anything her parents had done for her. Then, a few hours later, or perhaps the next day, she'd phone back, crying. I apologized profusely. She claimed to have been really stressed. The cycle would then unavoidably repeat itself a few days later. Another telephone call. Another urgent request for funds. Carol would talk to me about these experiences for hours on end. She'd describe the calls in great detail. But, and this was the most difficult part, if I ever expressed agreement or ventured to condemn Eleanor's actions, Carol would immediately turn against me. She'd snap at me, saying she could complain about her mother while I couldn't. That I did not comprehend their family dynamics. That I had no idea what Eleanor had gone through. It was an infuriating, nonsensical protection mechanism. I eventually got to the point where I couldn't listen to it any longer. I told Carol, as gently as possible, that I loved her but could no longer be her sounding board for these concerns. It was extremely exhausting, and it was straining our relationship. When Carol and I decided to marry, finances, understandably, became a big bone of dispute. Carol desired a lavish wedding. I agreed to pay for it. I had saved diligently and could afford it. However, I also insisted on a prenuptial agreement. It was not a lack of trust in Carol. It was about practicalities. I had seen personally her family's financial turmoil, and I wanted to protect myself by ensuring that our marriage began on a stable, financially secure basis. Carol's reaction was intense. She was highly offended, accusing me of not trusting her and of treating our marriage as a business transaction. She threatened to cancel the wedding totally. She stated that a marriage should be based on love and trust, not formal documents and financial calculations. Eleanor, of course, intervened, escalating Carol's fury. She called me and chastised me for even contemplating a prenup. They told me that their family possessed honor and integrity. I didn't have anything to worry about. During this conversation, I lost my patience. I explained to them, quite forcefully, that Eleanor had a lengthy history of borrowing money from Carol and never repaying it. Her claim to familial honor seemed extremely empty. Both Carol and Eleanor were outraged. Carol packed her bags and departed. She moved out of our apartment, claiming that I had insulted her family, that I did not love her. I was devastated. I tried constantly to convey that my purpose was not to doubt her loyalty or commitment, but only to protect our shared interests. To guarantee that we came into our marriage with clear eyes and expectations, free of any potential asset conflicts. She would not listen. A week later, she arrived at my door uninvited. She was crying and begged me to take her back. She said she'd made a terrible mistake. She told me that Eleanor and Richard had asked that she start giving them her wages so they could manage her finances more effectively. It was then, she claimed, that she realized the magnitude of their manipulation. She agreed to the prenup. So we reconciled, and the wedding planning proceeded. The wedding itself was an experience. We had no option but to invite Eleanor and Richard. It was essential to Carol, and I wanted to make her happy. However, their attendance, as well as their reaction to the wedding's size, constituted a watershed moment. They were visibly surprised by how well the event went. Following the wedding, Eleanor's money requests, which had previously been focused mostly at Carol, began to come directly to me. She would phone me, sometimes many times a week, and ask me to purchase her items. She'd ask me to pay for services she used, such as hair appointments, dry cleaning, and shopping expenditures. She'd sometimes just ask for cash without explaining why. I continually tried to convey to her that I was not required to pay for these items. That I wasn't her personal bank account. But she would persist, using guilt, deception, and plain begging to wear me down. She would say she was elderly and fragile. She has no one else to turn to. That as Carol's spouse, I had an obligation to assist her. I caved a couple times early on just to keep the peace. I persuaded myself I could afford it and it wasn't worth the fight. The refrigerator incident was an excellent illustration. Eleanor contacted me unexpectedly and requested that I buy her a new refrigerator. She stated her current one was outdated and unattractive, and she wanted a new stainless steel model with all of the latest features. I pointed out, properly, that her current refrigerator was fully functional. There was no real need for a new one. I questioned why she wasn't approaching Carol or Richard for the money. Her response was irritating. She mentioned that I had a high income. Because I was wealthy, I should be accountable for funding some of her bills. I adamantly rejected it. Eleanor began to cry, screaming into her phone. She told me how disappointed she was in me. How I was failing to fulfill my duty as a husband to my wife. She then called Carol and, using the same manipulative tactics, persuaded her that if I didn't purchase her the refrigerator, Carol would. Carol, who earned substantially less than me, would have to go into her personal resources to fulfill her mother's whim. I eventually relented. I got Eleanor a refrigerator just to shut her up. Then there was the issue with the sweaters. My parents, bless their hearts, had ordered identical sweaters for Carol and myself as an anniversary present. They were hand-knitted with a unique design that my father had helped construct. My father, overjoyed with the present, had texted me images of the sweaters before they were shipped. When the box arrived, I carefully stored it in the garage, planning to surprise Carol on our anniversary. On the day of our anniversary, I went to the garage to get the package. It was gone. I looked everywhere and turned the garage upside down, but it was nowhere to be found. I asked Carol whether she'd seen it, if she'd accidentally thrown it away thinking it was junk mail. She had not. The parcel has simply disappeared? It was puzzling. A month later, I visited Eleanor and Richard at their condo, and the sweaters were hanging in their closet. My parents had sent us hand-knitted monogram sweaters with love. I confronted Eleanor, my rage scarcely restrained. She originally denied this. Then she claimed she found the package outside, near our trash cans. After further inquiry, she acknowledged being at our house, looking about in the garage, and seeing the package. She stated she assumed I threw it away. That it was unwelcome. So she had taken it. It was an outright falsehood. An obvious case of theft. I was infuriated. I stated unequivocally that she had no authority to search our possessions. That she stole from us. Her response was astounding. She scoffed, claiming the sweaters were cheap and poorly made. She had actually done me a favor by taking them. She said I should be thankful. I informed her that they were a present from my parents. That they possessed sentimental worth. It did not matter. She just didn't understand it. I took the sweatshirts back. Carol and I departed immediately. On the way home, I anticipated Carol to be as upset as I was. Instead, she defended her mother. She believed Eleanor had simply made a mistake. That I had overreacted. That I had embarrassed her. She said Eleanor had not intended any harm. She was probably bewildered. I could not believe it. Even after Eleanor had been caught red-handed stealing from us, Carol continued to make excuses for her. Then Eleanor called Carol and demanded that she purchase a new dishwasher. It was a totally unneeded expense. Their home consisted of only 2 people. Richard and his buddies spend the majority of their evenings drinking at the local tavern. Carol attempted to reason with her, highlighting the absurdity of the request. But Eleanor insisted. She mentioned that all of their neighbors had dishwashers. She felt ashamed to be the only one on her floor without one. When Carol continued to refuse, Eleanor informed her she wished she hadn't been born. That any other child would be grateful to have such a giving mother. Carol was selfish and ungrateful. Carol was devastated. She spent the remainder of the evening in tears. I had stopped speaking to Eleanor immediately following the sweater incident. But the next day, I got a text from her. She suggested that I step up and support Carol, that I should purchase the dishwasher for her. She had just emotionally attacked her daughter, and now she was asking that I pay for the object that started the whole thing. I ignored the message. I just couldn't engage. I showed Carol the text as, I don't know, proof of her mother's actions. Carol's reply was unfortunately inevitable. She informed me that she had already spent a substantial chunk of her savings to order the dishwasher for Eleanor. She claimed she couldn't bear hearing her mother so angry. Richard's death a few months later was heartbreaking, but it also introduced new challenges. He was discovered lifeless on a street near their unit following a night of heavy drinking. It was an unexpected and shocking loss. Eleanor was naturally devastated. However, the situation suddenly became even more challenging. Richard had accumulated a substantial amount of debt, including loans from shady persons. Loan sharks, essentially. Eleanor was presented with a mound of invoices and threats of harm if she did not pay. She had to sell nearly everything they owned to pay off Richard's debts. She was left with almost nothing. Carol and I considered it, and despite the history and troubles, we decided to take Eleanor in. She had nowhere else to go. It felt right. The humane thing to do. I wondered if this was a chance for a fresh start. Perhaps with Richard gone and Eleanor in a more vulnerable position, she will be more reasonable. I greeted her warmly and made every effort to make her feel at ease. But I noticed Eleanor looking through our possessions. When we left the house, or just in another room, she would rummage through drawers, closets, and boxes. It wasn't obvious, she was cautious. However, I would discover things somewhat out of order. Drawers are not entirely closed, boxes have moved. I challenged her about this multiple times. Every time, she'd make the same lame reason. She was simply inquisitive. She was only glancing around. I requested Carol to speak with her. To define some boundaries. Carol's response was consistently the same. Just let it go. She's going through a hard time. However, it felt like a perpetual invasion of privacy. Then everything started to disappear. Initially, the pieces were small. An ornamental vase. A set of coasters. A few books. Then more valuable stuff started to disappear. Carol's jewelry was in pieces. Strangely, whenever these items went missing, Eleanor would come home from her outings carrying shopping bags. Filled with new clothing, new shoes, new accessories. Given her financial circumstances, she had no income. It became increasingly clear that she was selling our belongings to fund her buying spree. She had gathered completely new clothing. Filled with beautiful gowns and matching heels. Despite not having a discernible source of revenue. I pointed this out to Carol as gently as possible. I voiced my growing suspicions that Eleanor was taking from us. Carol dismissed my concerns. She told me not to focus on her mother. She deserved to reward herself after all she'd been through. I didn't mind Eleanor treating herself in principle. But not using our money? Not by selling our possessions. It was theft. Plain and simple. The incident with my wallet was the final straw. I got home from work early one afternoon. Carol was still in her office. I went to our bedroom to take a shower, as is my custom. When I got out of the shower, I discovered Eleanor standing in our bedroom. Near my dresser. She held my wallet in her hand. And she was going through it. I was shocked and speechless for a moment. I yelled at her and demanded to know what she was doing. Why was she in our bedroom? Why was she going through my wallet? She turned bright red and stammered, unable to provide a coherent response. She resembled a child caught with her hand in the cookie jar. I later told Carol about the incident. I expected her to be equally outraged as I was. To finally recognize her mother's actions for what they were. Instead, she minimized it. She assumed Eleanor simply needed some money. That it wasn't a huge problem. She even offered that Eleanor could steal money from my wallet if she needed it. That I need to be more understanding. She accused me of looking down on her family. Of condemning them because they were not as wealthy as I was. She said that her family did not grow up in poverty and desperation like mine had. This implies that my upbringing has made me less understanding. That comment stung. It was a low strike that exposed a deep-seated resentment I had not recognized existed. I decided that I needed some space. I went on a walk. A long, aimless walk, attempting to make sense of Carol's response. I could not understand her steadfast devotion to her mother. Even when Eleanor was obviously in the wrong. Even when she stole from us. Carol apologized when I returned home a few hours later. She said she had a firm conversation with Eleanor. Telling her not to enter our bedroom again. Not to go through our possessions. I just nodded. I didn't believe it would make a difference. Eleanor has repeatedly demonstrated that she had no regard for boundaries. No consideration for our property. And I was correct. It did not cease. I made precautions to protect my belongings. I added locks to my dresser drawers. On the cabinets in the living room. On the storage crates in the garage. It felt silly to lock away my own belongings in my own home. But it was the only way I could feel any sense of security. Then I arrived yesterday. The result of months of frustration. Of feeling abused and degraded. Carol called me at work, frantic. She had gone home for lunch, as she often did, to check on Eleanor. But Eleanor was gone. Not just out for a walk or a shopping expedition. Her belongings were also gone. Her clothing. Her personal effects. It's all gone. Carol, understandably worried, began looking around the house. Trying to figure out what happened. And that's when she made her discovery. Her credit card, which she always carried in her wallet, was missing. A considerable percentage of her jewelry, including precious antiques, was also gone. Eleanor didn't answer her phone. Carol was frightened that Eleanor would use her credit card. That she would pawn the jewelry. She begged me for aid. My instant response, the only rational one in my mind, was to call the cops. Report Eleanor's activities as theft. Carol reacted angrily. She claimed she couldn't possibly denounce her own mother to the police. That was unimaginable. She accuses me of being unhelpful. Of not caring about her emotions. And that is where I am currently. And, I'm just exhausted. Drained. I feel like I'm constantly up against Eleanor's entitlement and Carol's supporting conduct. I advised calling the police because that is what happens when someone takes from you. It's the logical and reasonable path of action. But Carol considers it a betrayal. So, AITA? Am I wrong to advise that we involve the police? Isn't that the usual protocol in such cases? I honestly don't know what else to do. Update 1. The response has been tremendous, to say the least. I sincerely appreciate your support. And I didn't expect so many people to weigh in. Many of you have pointed out Carol's troubling behavior. And honestly, I see it too. I do. The reality is, we rarely encounter problems. It occurs virtually exclusively when Eleanor is present. It's becoming evident that I need to have a serious discussion with Carol about this situation. As long as Eleanor is a constant presence in our life, this pattern of boundary violations and Carol's inability to enforce them will unavoidably continue. Update 2. I had that chat with Carol. I even showed her this post, hoping that an outside perspective would be helpful. It did not go well. She is really upset, alleging that the comments are unjust and judgmental. She grew highly defensive, claiming that anyone would support their parent regardless of the circumstances. She also felt betrayed since I had shared such a private topic online. I tried to clarify that my objective was only to determine whether contacting the police was the best line of action. But she didn't respond. She's fully blaming me, and I'm not sure why she can't understand Eleanor's role in all of this. Update 3. After a week, Carol finally received communication from Eleanor. It turns out that Eleanor pawned part of the stolen jewels. She claims to crave independence. That she is tired of living with us because she feels restrained in her actions. Carol threatened to contact the police if the remaining jewelry was not returned. But Eleanor appears completely unfazed. Carol is now urging me to interfere. To talk with Eleanor. To try to reason with her. I strongly informed Carol that I would be staying out of it. To my surprise, Carol has now blamed me for Eleanor's leaving. Claiming I made her feel unwelcome. I'm actually speechless at this moment. Update 4. After some time, I took the painful decision to file for divorce. Many of you undoubtedly expected this conclusion, and I must admit that I wish I had recognized the necessity sooner. Carol was able to block the credit card after Eleanor stole her possessions. However, the retrieval of the valuables proved difficult. I reaffirmed my suggestion to involve law enforcement, but she flatly refused. She then had the arrogance to ask me to replace the stolen jewelry. What's her reasoning? Eleanor took it, and I allegedly made Eleanor feel uncomfortable, thus it was my job to acquire replacement jewelry. All because she refused to contact the cops. I flatly refused? I informed her I had finished. With her. With her family. With the overall toxic condition, a heated dispute ensued, during which she made some extremely cruel remarks about my parents. I told her to go. She was extremely upset and accused me of being unjust. I told her to pack her items. And she departed, cursing me, and went to dwell with Eleanor. Update 5. Since Carol's departure, she and Eleanor have been constantly contacting me. Carol even contacted my parents. Thankfully, my parents are not like hers. Carol was told by my mother that she trusted my judgment even if she did not know all of the details. It has been a huge relief to have their support. I haven't told them the complete tale yet, but I plan to. I'm meeting with a lawyer today to discuss the divorce proceedings. I've already followed some of your advice and changed the locks. I have also bought security cameras, which I will install this week. I'm not sure if Eleanor or Carol will try anything, but I think it's important to be prepared. Update 6. Eleanor was detained as the situation developed over the course of 2 months. She had been stalking people. Arriving at my employment. When I went out with buddies. It was quite stressful. On one occasion, she hurled a drink at me, spoiling an otherwise nice shirt. I tried to be cordial, but her conduct only got worse. She started showing up at my residence, even threw pebbles at my windows. Today, she crossed a line. She broke my bedroom window. I phoned the cops. I had no other option. I simply could not take it any longer. Carol is predictably enraged. She maintains that I should have handled the situation quietly. Eleanor is going through a difficult time. I did laugh. I informed her that Eleanor deserved the repercussions of her behavior. Carol has now demanded that I forgive Eleanor. After everything. The stalking. The harassment. Property damage. Forgiveness is not an option. I finally told my parents the whole nature of the problem. They were startled that I hadn't informed them sooner. And they completely support my decision to proceed with the divorce. I warned them to be cautious, although I doubt Eleanor or Carol will target their property given the distance. Carol eventually bailed Eleanor out of jail. I made it clear to Carol that she was responsible for covering the expense of the window repair. Alternatively, I would seek legal action. She and Eleanor eventually agreed to pay for the damages. Final update. The divorce is final, it is officially over, and it feels extremely liberated. It's as if a weight has been lifted, and I can now breathe freely. My now ex-wife attempted to obtain spousal maintenance and made a move for my assets. However, the prenuptial agreement fulfilled its goal, it shielded me. She argued, she pleaded. However, her efforts proved useless. Anyone thinking about getting married should strongly consider a prenuptial agreement. It may be an awkward topic, but it is very necessary. It requires planning and preparedness. That brings this chapter of my life to a close. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.